um, would like to view it in the future, as well as those folks who are unable to join us today um, for the in-person portion of this. But we are very excited to get kicked off today. And I'm realizing too that I am also checking to see if people are in the waiting room. So I'm going to try and balance a couple of things while we're doing this today. But I am very excited to get us kicked off today to talk about a session that LT and I are very excited to present on. To our knowledge, we haven't been a part of a session that's exploring this topic around maps. So I'm excited to see today that some folks might be interested as well in cartography, learning about how to navigate spaces, and then particularly looking at that through the lens of equity when we're thinking about our adult learners on campus. So very excited to chat with you all today. We have a couple of portions during this session where there'll be chances for you to ask and answer questions that we have. So we would love to hear your thoughts, hear how you're experiencing this or might be able to experience this on your campuses, and how you might make some change moving forward to continue to build those equitable and more accessible spaces for our adult learners across the country. So as most of you probably know, this session is connected to our Urban Adult Learner Institute, or as we call UALI. Within UALI, there are 4 components, each of those represented by the colors on the screen. I've been told that kind of looks like a metro line for anybody who's in the TC area or has been. It's not the metro line. Those are our 4 components. Today's session is connected to component number 4, which is our campus and community partners. Our campus and community partnerships, where we're going to explore how to make connections with others on campus and off campus to think about ways that we can continue to build more inclusive spaces for our adult learners. So just to reintroduce myself, I'm sure if you are a part of UALI or the Coalition for Urban Serving Universities, you may have received an email from me at some point. But my name is Jimmy McClellan. I serve as the Associate Director for the Coalition of Urban Serving Universities, which we oftentimes just shorten to USU. But it's nice to see you all today, and I'm looking forward to the conversation. And I'll turn it over to LT.
Thanks, Jimmy. I'm Latanya Reese-Miles, also known as LT. And currently I'm a director of university partnerships for a company called Re-Up Education. We're focused exclusively and solely on adult learners. I'm also, like Jimmy, a proud first-generation college graduate and also a lover of maps. Also a 2-time graduate of a public land-grant university. So I'm very excited to be here today. I also now know that I was an adult learner. I didn't know these things when I was in school, right? So excited to be with you all today to share our passion for this topic, actually. So another part of my identity is also being a researcher. And maybe about 7 years ago now, I worked on a piece, and I'm happy to share a link to the book that this chapter is in, that focused specifically on how students sort of use and reframe physical space in order to address their sometimes lack of belonging, right? And so in particular, in working with students, one of the things I observed and wrote about is the ways in which students sometimes have to navigate. And so a couple of things that came about could be, and this might be relevant for many of you here, you may have observed students offering like their own orientation sessions, right? So like a student-led orientation. Pamela, I see you nodding your head. Sometimes historically underrepresented groups do that as a way of like a contrast or being more inclusive to what the university like formally offers. One of the things I also found and highlighted, though, was the way in which students use maps or create or recreate maps. And we'll talk, obviously, we're going to talk more about that, but I wanted to give a high level overview that the things that the students found significant to them, which were often different than what the university said was significant, includes things like vernacular or public space. So these were things like common rooms, lounges, coffee shops, things that were on campus, but also things that were off campus. And one of the things I talked about in this piece too is that, like, what is the so what, like the why this is important, is that these were ways in which students contributed to counter storytelling, and also a way of like centering their own experiences. So we wanted to start with this overall. And again, I can add a link if you want to read the entire piece, but start thinking about reframing physical space, the notion of counter storytelling, and being over a little bit more inclusive when it comes to space, recognizing that often I don't know about you all, but many, probably no one here has the ability to actually change the campus, right? So how do we change the way we think about the campus?
All right, so we are going to kind of move into the conversation about campus maps in particular. So a couple of campus maps are on your screen. These are probably pretty similar or pretty familiar to you. Most folks who have attended college in a on a physical campus or work on one have seen these. What we really want to center this conversation around is, how do we take something that has been around for a really long time, and maybe we use language on this that maybe we assume others might know, like registrar or bursar or things like that, and take the language, take the symbols that we're using, take the layout of these campus maps, whether they are physical maps that we're printing out, giving to students, or using virtually. How do we take all of that information to build the best types of maps for adult learners? So that's really what this conversation is centering on. And LT, I want to see if you have anything to add here.
Well, one of the things I'd like to just highlight too that we experience is that when you think about students who've transferred, for example, from a two-year institution to a four-year institution, the way a campus is laid out often at a technical or community college often is very different than a four-year school. And so the way buildings are named, the way things are arranged, so we have to be thoughtful too. I also was a transfer student, and just being thoughtful about how students are being coached and socialized initially versus what may happen when they go to a different type institution type. And so obviously we're here today to focus specifically on the experiences of adult learners. So we just want to take a moment to talk about, well, what are some of the unique needs of adult learners, right? And we know that many institutions now are focused on adult learners. So one of the things we recognize is that because adult learners often have multiple responsibilities, and yes, while going to school is very important, it might not be their top priority, right? Because of caregiving, other kinds of responsibilities. So they often need more flexibility in scheduling, for example, might not need like a whole 13 or 15 weeks for classes, often looking for a shorter period of time, and also flexibility just in terms of the time of day in which classes are offered. I already mentioned competing daily priorities, but also, and again, this was me too. I was super focused by the time I graduated. I was already married and knew what I wanted. And so for me, I was paying for school myself. I needed to know exactly what I was getting out of my education. I didn't have time for any games, right? So making sure that adult learners want to know a clear return on their investment in higher ed. And we also want to acknowledge that, excuse me, adult learners often are a heterogeneous population, including a number of intersecting identities. And we'll just highlight a couple, and not all of them, but including first generation, veteran, adult learners, so-called post-traditional groups. If there's anything else we missed, please be sure to put them in the chat as well. We just wanted to sort of set a frame and a basic understanding of the adult learner experience, but feel free to add more things that you may have observed as well about this population.
Yes, and I think, now is a good time, to absolutely add to the conversation. But we have a couple of questions here too, and we'd love to hear from you all, just your experiences as it relates to kind of this intersecting topic we're talking about with maps and adult learners. So feel free, if you'd like to raise your hand or put something in the chat. We'll give you a couple minutes, or a couple seconds rather, to think about some of these questions, but we'd love to hear out from a few people. And those questions are, how do you currently use maps in your role at your institution? In your role or at your institution, rather. What format are maps typically available to students, faculty, and staff? And then at what time in the student experience are maps typically used? So just give you a couple of seconds, again, if you want to raise your hand and share with us, or if you'd like to type something in the chat, you're more than welcome to do that.
Anne mentioned bus maps are important at Rutgers. They need to have real-time updates of where the buses are. Absolutely. Hey, Chris.
No. At Ohio State, honestly, I'm not even sure if we have printed maps anymore. We have an app that is built and maintained locally. And so we have a map that even you can plug in so it's a smartphone app, obviously, where you can plug in the building you want to go to and it'll give you walking directions. I saw on one of those paper maps where they kind of had a 3D for that one in New Orleans, or semi 3D look, so you could identify the look of the building. And our last set of paper maps had something like that, but they can actually see the picture of what the building actually looks like on the thing. And we also have the bus thing that the Rutgers person mentioned. How I currently use maps mostly is encouraging the students that I work with to download the OSU app. I work with students who are returning to Ohio State after time away, and some of them have been away for a long time. Campus looks really different. I actually have something that I send anybody I talk to before they even decide for sure whether or not to re-enroll. A list of things that have changed since, for example, since we moved from quarters to semesters, but also like how the areas in the immediate off campus look really different. And it's like, it's okay, you'll find your way around and stuff like that. So that's mostly it, is just encouraging them to take use of it because it will help them navigate a campus that they thought would be familiar and maybe isn't.
Thanks for sharing that, Chris. So many different ways of engaging and also acknowledging, yeah, well, our campuses are rapidly changing, right? And so rather than contributing to further like isolation or doubt, why not just be proactive with the student and say, hey, things have changed and but you will be successful and here's a tool that'll help you do that. A number of great comments. Pamela, I love how you mentioned, yes, providing a map, but also walking the student there if possible is another great form of support. And then Crystal mentions print and digital formats are provided, but no tactile or accessible formats yet. I love that. And then Kim says, the connection of maps in higher ed nomenclature to belonging and equity through the lens of adult learners. Yeah. Oh, you're appreciating this. Yes. Thank you. Thank you, Kim.
Yeah, and I particularly love Kim's comment and thinking about, it's making me to think about how, because we're all learning here together. LT and I are learning this too as we're talking about it, but something I'm thinking about as well is how maps in a lot of ways can be one of the first experiences for any student, but particularly our adult learners who may not be on campus as much as maybe our our 18-year-old learners or fresh out of high school learners, to be able to see the whole campus maybe for what it is. So they rely on some of those symbols or the words that we use to explain what spaces and places are and where they might feel most welcomed going to. So I love that. I see that we have a couple others sharing as well. I'm going to continue reading through some of these, but I'll move us through the presentation because a lot of the things that were just mentioned are on our next slide. Do you want me to go? I can't remember who's going.
I can
Anyway,
recap.
well, so just thinking about how, we've talked about how it sounds like some institutions have moved fully to virtual maps. So using technologies, smartphones, being able to find it through a website, and thinking about how those may or may not be as accessible in printed versions as well. What we want to think about too is how adult learners like to learn or like to experience, wayfinding and reading maps. That when we think about the research that's showing us that many adult learners may not feel as comfortable with technologies, how do we make sure that the first thing that they're experiencing when they come, maybe after coming to just tour campus for the first time or just walk through campus, how can we already kind of set them on a foot that makes them feel more included? Where are printed maps located? How can they find them? If they are just virtual, if that's maybe a policy decision that exists and maybe isn't in our power to change, how can we at least make it a little easier for them to be able to find that? Because they might not know which website to go to immediately. Is that on the homepage of the institution? So on and so forth. And that kind of connects to those generational differences. When we're talking about adult learners, at this point, we're talking about many, many generations. I don't know if we can include Gen Z just yet, but certainly millennials, Gen X, and so on and so forth may have some different experiences or comfortability with technology. So how do we make sure that that is thought about, as well as those different learning styles? I know someone mentioned, I could scroll back, but I know that they talked about tactile and being able to write things down, circle things, highlight a route. Is that possible or as easy to do in technology versus printed, or again, just for that comfortability thought? But LT, anything you would add here in thinking about using maps and how campuses might better make sure that those are accessible for learners of all types?
Well, just a couple of points. First of all, I think the people are activated, Jimmy, because there's some great conversation in the chat. Debbie has reported that UNT, I think that's University of North Texas, has a Braille map of the campus in the Union, which is amazing, something we hadn't thought about necessarily. I just want to add, as a proud card-carrying member of Gen X, I still very much prefer paper for some things, not all things, but maps for me. A paper map is really helpful. And then I see my brother and buddy Brett Bruner. Ooh, say that a couple times. But we come from an orientation background as well. Often that's the first time full-time freshman, right? And I remember distinctly working with those students and giving them maps too. So they had both. They had both an ability to have paper maps because we wanted to highlight for them, and at the same time they had their campus app. But sometimes the apps fail, right? So just having multiple options, I think, is one of the takeaways here.
Yes, and I love that too. And thinking about somewhere was mentioned about restrooms, gender neutral restrooms and things like that. Something I think about as well when we think about our adult learner population, especially for our student parents, where changing tables might be located. And if they're in only men's restrooms, women restrooms, or if there are like unisex restrooms, where are those located? Because I know in some adult learners that I've spoken with, particularly those who have children, that can be a concern, like trying to find somewhere to be able to change your child. So Excellent. Love the conversation. Keep that going. Loving kind of looking over in the chat and seeing the engagement. So when we think about, so going back to the purpose of our presentation today, anything we do within UALI, we want to make sure that it's practical and that you're able to take any of the learnings that we're talking about and apply them directly to your campus. So in conversation with LT and kind of what sparked the conversation about maps today, was thinking about some of the examples of schools we know that are doing this really well, and key points to be able to include in maps that can automatically make these more accessible for our adult learners, but that end up helping probably everyone at the institution because they become more inclusive. So some effective campus maps for adult learners have included things like annotations. So being able to explain what certain buildings are or why a certain function of a campus is highlighted on the maps. LT is going to show us in a couple of minutes some really good examples of how to do that in a virtual space, but they can be carried over onto maybe physical or printed maps. Highlighting campus and off-campus resources. We know that our adult learners are engaging with campus in different ways. They may be utilizing spaces off campus as well. So thinking about how we kind of expand that map a little bit, zoom out to kind of get a little higher view of maybe those resources that are just around campus or for our urban schools, how you can utilize the city as well to be a space to continue studying, learning, to have those breaks away from campus. Maybe if you are a caregiver as well, spaces that are inclusive for multiple people in the family to make campus and that community feel more communal. Creating symbols and legends. So I kind of had to dig out my third grade vocabulary of maps, and thinking about how we design the key for a map, what types of symbols we use that are maybe a little more obvious and kind of can describe what things are through an image, and using that legend that kind of further explains maybe what some of those symbols are. Maybe that's a place where you can put some annotations as well. And then additionally, thinking about how to have those easily accessible virtual maps and printed versions of those maps as well. Where are they located? If someone finds one online, and maybe, not too many people have, printers anymore. So thinking about if you have a virtual version of a map, but maybe don't have access to a printer at home, where can you easily go on campus, whether that's the student union or an office that's focused on the transfer experience, or if you have an adult learner centered office on campus, where can those be easily accessible for adult learners at different times of day? And then finally, thinking about how we include adult learners in the process of map creation. Sometimes, we just want to go and we want to create something and we want to make things work, but how do we continue to have the adult learners' voices present within our map making? Because something that we might think of as professionals, as adult learners from a couple of years ago, or non-adult learners at all, maybe we haven't been adult learners in our experience, we may have some blind spots when it comes to the spaces that are used today on campus, and knowing that those can evolve. So having a time for your maps to be re-looked at every couple of years and thinking about what new spaces are popping up on campus, how can we continue to converse with other offices on campus or spaces close to campus that are may be more friendly to adult learners, or feel more comfortable for adult learners to use. So those are just a couple of things, but I will move us over to one of the examples from the University of Hawaii at Manoa that we felt like did this pretty well.
And before I do that, thanks, Jimmy. I just want to stress that last point about centering the voices of the adult learners. I was telling Jimmy earlier today that I'm teaching a grad seminar on design innovation. And one of the top tenets is actually, when you're problem solving, is to invite the community that you're solving the problem for into the conversation early enough. early. And so that's one critical piece. We also want to acknowledge that although we appreciate you being here and you're all on fire and we're all fellow map nerds, we also understand that you have a lot on your plate already. And so this is a way of completing a goal and a task, but also taking something off of your plate to by virtue of having students be involved in it. So we just want to be mindful of workload. I just want to point that out. All right, so one of the things that is exciting me comes from specifically student parents at Manoa from the University of Hawaii, which the acronym is SPAM, which is awesome. So SPAM is like staple food in Hawaii, right? So shout out to them. This is specifically child-friendly sites on campus. So first of all, you can see they didn't create a whole new map. It's taking the existing campus map, and like Jimmy mentioned before, highlighting and annotating what is available on the college campus. So my understanding is that the students themselves identified these spaces. So not only does it include like the children's center or a pond that's on campus, it might be a little bit difficult to see, but one of the things that's also highlighted on here, it's number 3 on the map, is Yogurtland, right? I love that. So going back to understanding what's in the students' ecosystem, what do they think is important, is the best way to go for creating for reframing and creating a map like this. One of the things I just want us to go back to is when we're thinking about what are the experiences, the common characteristics of adult learners, that's a way to approach the creating or reframing of a map. We talked earlier about adult learners may have their own children. So now we have a child-friendly site. Jimmy mentioned very quickly, what about those who are also caregivers? Imagine a map where you're talking about the spaces and places for the elderly that are on campus. Maybe it's a nice view, for example, right? Some place of peace or something like that. We talked about adult learners who are looking for flexibility or have different schedules. Maybe it's a map that highlights places that are open later or earlier, you know what I mean? So just thinking of the experience of the student, what they're going through and what they may be looking for. And so you can have multiple maps there. All right, so we wanted to just give some tips. I'm sure you might have your own, so please share them in the chat too. Like, how do you go about deciding or thinking through what to create in a map? We've said it multiple times, but talk to the key stakeholders. So the number one, those would be the students, the adult learners themselves, faculty and staff who are also on the front lines with these students and may have a different point of view. We would encourage you to do that. Of course, we want you to think about what are the spaces that, like 2 things, right? That are used often for adult learners where they're organically gathering, but where are the spaces that you want them to actually gravitate toward, but they may not know about. And so we want to make sure that those things are being used. You know, there's been some data that comes out that recently that often the groups that need a service the most are the ones that are less likely to use it. So, and not just highlight it, like annotate it. What is it? Why do they need to go there? Right? Those types of things. We also want to acknowledge that doing these overall, that creating a map like this would be an opportunity to actually make a big impact. Ideally with like low cost, right? When it comes to creating a map. I'm going to be honest, not because I'm avoidant, but I have not yet dipped my toe into AI as a resource, but you might consider doing that to help you with some of the text that goes into creating a map. So we all need to acknowledge where our comfort zones are, right? And if you are feeling really confident in that or want to learn more about it, we just wanted to acknowledge that that's a resource for you as well.
Yeah, and I admittedly am one of these early adopters of generative AI, and how I like to think about this is I've had many conversations with folks who might be in an office of one, for example, that's supporting adult learners. And sometimes it feels like there may not be somebody to talk to generate ideas. So using something like ChatGPT to say, because the information's updated through 2021, and I'm going to assume that everyone here works at a campus that was founded before 2021, so that information is out there online. But you can ask it to, you know, for example, I know we had Chris from Ohio State. You can type in there to say, in thinking about the areas on campus at Ohio State University, well, the Ohio State University, and right off of campus within the Columbus area, how can spaces be utilized by student populations that might be over 25 or have students who have children or students who are caregivers? And you can ask it that, and it might just generate some ideas of, look at it, such and such blocks away from campus, there's this space that might be utilized for X, Y, and Z. So it's just a way to potentially use it as a thought partner, because even if maybe that information wasn't 100% correct, it might get your mind going about some other spaces or people that you might want to talk to on campus or off campus in different offices or businesses, so on and so forth, that might be included. So that was the thought around that. So next, we will move into another discussion that we have before we move into kind of the knowledge deepening of thinking about how do we actually start to do this? What's one tool that we can use to start making those maps more accessible for our adult learners? So some questions that we have for you, let me just move this out of the way, are based on our conversation so far today, how would you like to use campus maps to support adult learners as they navigate campus? Additionally, are there any other navigational tools, so things that you might utilize besides maps, to help adult learners explore and use resources on and around campus? And I know through the chat, I'm seeing a lot of very innovative ideas that are kind of surrounding this. And then finally, what is one step that you can take this week? Because again, we want to create bite-sized information for you to start making progress and starting to think about or have conversations surrounding this topic. So what's one step that you can take this week to see these tools actualized on your campuses? So pause for a minute. Would love to have folks share out via hand raising, or if you want to type it, you can do that as well. So we'll just pause for a second, and I'd love to hear what you have to say.
Question, are you going to make this slide deck available?
Yes, the slide deck will be available, as well as the recording, and those will all be located in the Google Drive that you have access to as a UALI participant, which I know you are.
First step would be to share this with our DEIA director. So
amazing.
I commit to doing that.
Yeah, please share widely. Thank you.
Yeah, I'll go ahead and speak up. We are in the process of forming a transfer and adult student advisory board because, you know, as staff and faculty, we talk a lot about these students and wanting to serve them better. So we wanted to make sure that we had a group of students who could actually speak for themselves and tell us their stories and roadblocks that they've run into. So this would be something great that I could present to them as you know, as one of our projects. So
I think that is so important, especially as we're thinking about the student voice present in this. Thinking too, I just want to acknowledge, I can't see everybody who's attending, but I know that they were here just because I'm sharing my screen. But Lois Shelley, Joyce Brandon from the University of Memphis, and Yasmina Johnson from Fresno State are adult learners or recently graduated adult learners who are on our advisory board for UALI. Almost all of the information that I'm pointing out goes through them first for them to give feedback on and think about, because you know, recognizing I'm not currently an adult learner in the sense of being in an undergraduate institution. So making sure that the information we're putting out there is relevant. So I think that's amazing. And I find too that students in general, but definitely our adult learners, love to be included, as anybody would. If you're going to be talking about that population, of course, having the voices present are very important. Thank you.
Jimmy, Suzanne wrote that they love the idea of a family-friendly map and a map including spots that are open past 5 or on weekends. So Suzanne, you'll have to let us know when that happens. And then Pamela wrote at WSU, is that Washington State? Just want to, no?
Wichita.
Oh, it is Wichita. Oh, I knew that. I knew that. At Wichita, go Shockers. We have recently been recognized as being a gold level designation as employer supporting breastfeeding. That's awesome. Would like to have a map of where those places are and numbered. Great job. Great job in advance.
All right, thank you, and continue to share in the chat as well. I am going to move us along because you all might be curious about how to do this and how it's been done in the past. So as part of our knowledge deepening activity, LT is going to walk us through her practice that she's done with LMU in Los Angeles, how she was able to create a campus map that includes many of the best practices that we talked about with annotations and how to do that through Google Maps. This activity will be detailed in a document on the UALI Google Drive so that you can practice this as well. And if you are working toward the Adult Learner Advocate badge, this will be the activity that you'll practice with your campus. So you'll actually be able to create something, and then of course you'll submit that to us, and then start earning another component toward your badge. So very excited to hear how this has happened. So this, I know I have to unshare for you to share, but I just wanted everybody to admire this slide because I thought it was funny, and now I will.
You're so funny.
All right.
All right, folks. Me and my mini lives, right? One of those, hang on one second. Here we go. One of my lives was working at Loyola Marymount University, as Jimmy mentioned, in Los Angeles. And in that role, first generation initiatives fell under my portfolio. And one summer, I worked with a group of, with 2 students who were really interested in social justice at Loyola University, which is a Jesuit campus. Oh no, wait, hold on, let me go back. I undid it, hold on. Here we go. Okay, sorry about that. So one of the things
LT, I don't think we can see, or are you? We see the University of Hawaii Google page.
How about this?
There you go. Yes.
All right, we're back. We are back. So this is using Google Maps specifically. And so what the students did was, first of all, identified places on campus. Hold on. There we go. Spaces on campus that for them reflected social justice, and they grouped them, right? And so you might be able to see here. Hold on, see, when I undo things, like they go away. Here we go. This is what we need. All right. So Jimmy talked about having like legends and keys and things like that. So the first thing part of their research project was to identify spaces on campus that for them reflected a social justice theme. And they came up with faith, justice, green, sustainability, student initiated programs. Then they went to Google Maps, and actually one of the students has a background in design and photography. And so she took photos of spaces on campus, and the other student actually annotated. So here's an example, and they're color coded here. Hopefully, can you see the window on the side here? Yes. Okay. So let me try to find you. Again, so these are existing places on campus. It's not like they created new things, but the students wrote from their perspective what the significance was of the space. And so here, the Collins Center, for example, a very common place on campus, they wrote, following their move to the Loyola campus, the Marymount College faculty, administrators, and the president would gather together every Thursday for lunch in what is now the Collins Center. These weekly gatherings were a sign of solidarity and support for women on campus. So every sort of annotation went back to the overall theme of how this relates to social justice. So the colors all represent some different aspects. So like I said, green is sustainability, for example. Purple, I believe, represents student support. And all of these were written from a student perspective. And so this was over 10 years ago, so it still exists. So here's another one. They felt like it was important to add the McNair Scholars Program. That was what they wanted to add on this campus map, and where you can find it and what it means. And so, for example, in 2013, the program opened a lounge for its students within the math department in University Hall, one of the many symbols of their recognition at LMU. All written for, I was an editor for this, but the students created all of this. They wrote out the text first and then went in and added the balloon, the little pieces here. I think, is there a question in the chat? No. But is there a question overall about this experience? Again, I was the advisor for this, right? The students, 2 students created this. They spent about 6 weeks over the summer. And I think it was a good opportunity for them to work as a team to make some decisions, because whenever you're creating a map, you're making a decision what to include and what not to include. And that's a big part of this as well. Like, why include this, right? So you're talking about critical thinking skills. When we're thinking about high impact practices, this is a way of helping to meet one of those goals and making those decisions, doing research, but then also leaving a lasting impact, right? So now they can go and show other people what they've done. And once again, shout out to this, to both of them, one for actually going in and taking the photos, and then the other for doing the annotations, which they both agreed upon, actually. So this could be one way to go about it. This is, a few steps away from taking an existing map and highlighting it. It can, go as deep as something like this, or creating something on an app. Like, we wanted to share a range of ways to do this.
Yes, thank you. So I would like to continue the conversation too with the folks in the room to see if there are any questions you have for LT about this practice, or just any questions or comments in general as we continue to have the conversation and close out today.
I'm fascinated by what you said about AI, Jimmy. Have you tried that with ChatGPT?
Tried everything with ChatGPT. Yes. What I love to do is give ChatGPT a persona. So you can ask it to say, so you have to start like a new, and if you're not familiar with ChatGPT, everything I'm going to say to you might not make any sense. But when you pull up ChatGPT, it basically has different conversations that you can have. If you have the same conversation in one box, like let's say you were like, in one of the chats you were talking about, you wanted to create like a Mediterranean meal plan for the next 7 days, and then you start talking about adult learners, it's going to use all that information that you talked about before. So what you need to do is create a new chat with it and say to it, I want you to answer my questions from the perspective of a student parent, and then maybe give it some details of what a student parent means to you, or what it means to your campus, or if you want to do it generally for adult learners or for caregivers or for administrators, whatever the case is, whatever you want it to be. And then you can ask it some questions. So yes, you can absolutely do that. I have not done it with specific campuses, but I know that you can do that because it will pull that information.
I was wondering what specifically your prompt was that you used.
Yep. Yeah. So you can say Wichita State or whatever institution you want, and maybe even give it some parameters too of like the surrounding area, the city within X number of blocks from campus. Sometimes it gives you really good things, and sometimes it gives you good things that you can expand upon that's just going to help you think about it a little bit differently. That's usually how I end up using ChatGPT. A lot of times it doesn't match exactly what I'm looking for, but it like gets my wheels turning. It helps me kind of think of something else to look at. A lot of ChatGPT or generative AI is about the questions that you're asking it. So if you're asking really good detailed questions, it's going to give you a pretty detailed response. Now I'm like, should I do a whole presentation on AI? I don't feel like that much of an expert on it, but as I'm talking, I'm like,
You
I
just
have a
need to
lot
be
to
one
say.
step ahead, just one step ahead. Don't need to be an expert.
Right. Yes, so I, you know, if you're comfortable with it, I know there's varying levels of comfortability. I think it can just be a tool as like somebody to talk with who, you know, if you know, maybe your colleague is in a meeting and you can't ask anybody at that moment, it's just a good way to kind of get the wheels turning, is my thought. Others, thoughts, questions? See a couple things in the chat.
Well, I mean, Jimmy, I just want to stress what you're already saying is I'm so glad that you and I worked on this together, because we have different strengths and different backgrounds and experiences. Like I have not been on ChatGPT, and it's okay if, you know, folks here haven't either. But just knowing what's possible, we always want to say to start within your own comfort zone and what feels natural and organic for you as a starting point. Right. And so if it means taking an existing campus map and merely numbering it and highlighting it, trust me, that's better than what you had from before. Right. And then maybe next go around, you do something different. Also leaning into the strengths of your students is what we would say.
Exactly. So again, UALI is all about building practices, trying new things, innovating for our adult learners. So if you have not already signed up to participate in UALI, there's a QR code on the screen. I also, for folks who don't want to use the QR code, I'll post that in the chat as well. So there's a link to sign up if you haven't already. Please feel free to. This is open access and free for anyone at any institution. Really, you don't even have to be an institution if you're just curious. You're more than welcome to join us. We would love to have you be a part of UALI and continuing to advocate for the experiences of our adult learners across the country. So I will, you know, we kind of did this slide already, but if you have any other questions moving forward or want to chat with either of us, we would be happy to do so. This is really, you know, I love having conversations about how we can continue to make more inclusive spaces for students on campus. So if you have ideas or thoughts, like we want to be your thought partners in that as well. So please know that we're accessible to you, and we'll be sure that in the knowledge deepening activity on the Google Drive, we'll put our contact information as well. I see Nadine has your hand up, so I just want to turn it over to you to see question. Maybe.
Yeah, thanks. This is, I'm sorry, I had to join in a little bit late, but this is like the best virtual meeting I've been in ages. This is so exciting. And Latanya, I love that map that you just showed, and my wheels are spinning. I'm at University of Illinois at Chicago, and we have a Black and African descent resources page. And I would love to build something like your map in as a companion, because it's all sort of like words and text and some pictures, but I'm just so excited by this. So thanks for sharing that. And I'm also the one, Jimmy, who put the question in the chat about whether you have explored Claude at all.
Oh yeah, I have not. I have not explored Claude. So
yeah, it's very, very interesting, because it's, I mean, it's a generative AI program, but it has a constitution, and which I think is a really interesting idea. It would just be fun to compare the kind of prompts that you give to ChatGPT and give them to Claude and see it having a constitution and rules for proper behavior that it has, if that results in anything different.
I will do that. Thank you for sharing that resource.
And thank
Great.
you, Nadine. I did put my LinkedIn page there if anyone wants to connect with me there.
Thank you. All right. I realize you were talking about the LMU one, and I don't have when you were talking about the resource that LT shared. So please don't mind me as I scroll now all the way back through what I just had up. But any other questions as we close out today, or comments? All right. Well, I don't think anyone's going to argue with ending a couple minutes early. Thank you for those on the East Coast who joined us during what potentially might have been your lunch break, for everyone else in the morning. But we are really excited to continue the conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today, and we're looking forward to seeing you next time.
Thank you for being here. Hope to see you in Seattle.
Yes. Let me stop recording.